and welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Reginald Barris, a stand-up comedian and concerned citizen, joined, as always, by my co-host, Sid Singh. Introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Sid Singh, and I'm a stand-up comedian and an unlicensed attorney, so we get both sides.
This week's chaos, the notorious Signal group chat where Pete Hegseth accidentally leaked sensitive operational details to a journalist at The Atlantic. And today, Sid and I are here to answer the question on everyone's mind. Can they just do that? Just as a quick aside, we recorded all this on April 1st. Because of that, it's not the most up-to-date. Hopefully, anything wildly hasn't changed since then. If so, we will try to make a note of it in the comments below. And before we get started, a quick word from our sponsors. This week's episode is sponsored by our patrons at patreon.com/dothatpod. Basically, right now, the show is free for everyone but us. And we're just some broke boy comedians, so it all adds up very quickly. There's equipment, hosting fees, other production costs, yada, yada, yada. And right now, Sid and I are going out of pocket to foot that bill. But by joining our patreon.com/dothatpod, you can get early access to videos and even get your name in the credits as a Patreon producer. Our goal here at Can They Just Do That is to help you make sense of the news and know your rights. And if you'd like to support us in that goal, we would love to welcome you in to our patreon.com/dothatpod. Link is in the description. Back to the show. According to The Atlantic, last month, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz created a text conversation on Signal with top U.S. officials, including Vice President J.D. Vance, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio to discuss strikes on Houthi militants in Yemen who had been threatening international shipping routes.
Waltz apparently accidentally added Atlantic Editor-in-Chief Jeffrey Goldberg to the chain.
According to The Atlantic, Hegseth sent operational details of forthcoming strikes on Yemen.
Now, the fallout has been the rare scandal to actually attract attention from regular Americans. It's even been condemned by prominent Trump supporters, Trump voters, and former military and Defense Department staff.
That said, the Trump administration has ignored all criticism and simply pushed back on details such as the plans being attack plans and not war plans as originally described.
As of this recording, no Trump official has been disciplined, much less fired, for the security breach.
There are several legal issues at play here. For instance, a judge on March 27th ordered that all the participants in the group chat not delete any messages and preserve all Signal group chats from March 11th to March 15th.
The lawsuit was brought by the nonprofit transparency and watchdog group American Oversight, which accused the officials in the Signal chat of flouting the Federal Records Act, which requires government communications by agency officials to be preserved.
Separately, the White House has recently instructed that the so-called Department of Government Efficiency preserve all communications sent over the Signal group chat in a new records retention policy, according to a filing in an unrelated case, but seemingly in response to the fallout from the Houthi attack group chat.
A separate legal issue is, of course, if the leaked chat constitutes leaking classified documents, which would trigger a violation of the Espionage Act.
But the government has claimed that it was sensitive but not classified information on the chat.
But until the strike goes, it's absolutely classified, as the lives of our pilots depend on secrecy, which was a claim from a former commander who spoke on the condition of anonymity.
And as petty as it is very funny to note that Pete Hegseth, during the chat, claimed that the OPSEC was clean, which is operational security, which it clearly wasn't. First, I guess we should start by asking, Sid, have you read the transcripts from the group chat?
I have actually tried to avoid reading the majority of the transcripts from the group chat, but I believe you did, and you were not thrilled.
It was not good, man. I mean, I know I'm being petty with this, but it's just so the banality of evil watching the way they discuss this. You think that it's going to be like these, whenever they have these war rooms, it's like in the movies where it's all these people in suits and badges and really discussing everything properly. But this is truly, it just sounds like a bunch of uncles flipping burgers at a family barbecue while they're in the middle of the text. Like one person literally texted emojis, fist bump, an American flag, and a fire emoji, and that was the entire text. On top of that, once you get past the pettiness of that, you see the way they discuss murdering people. Like it is so sociopathic the way they're clearly just discussing all this stuff so lightly. Like at one point it was like, hey, the building is leveled. We saw the guy go inside his girlfriend's apartment. Now that building is leveled. And J.D. Vance's response is, excellent. And it's like, bro, that's not excellent. Like, I do think it's yes, this is military discussions. This is probably how it happens all the time. But it's probably healthy for the people at large to just see how sociopathic these conversations are.
100%. I think it's one of those things too where, you know, because this is a issue that has actually like broken through and gotten people's regular attention, you're kind of hoping that people realize how unserious these people are. You know, I think so often people tend to believe that Republicans are good at military, Republicans are the serious ones, and Democrats are the wishy-washy ones who are just trying to help everyone, which is so unfeasible. And it's like, these people are clowns.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's the buffoonish behavior of it, what's so frustrating is the fact that this blunder was so huge, like the way they leaked the group chat by including a journalist into the group chat is so clownish that we can't even talk about like the actual strike itself. Like the fact that they, again, leveled an entire building because they saw the target walk into it, and the strike resulted in at least 57 civilians being killed. And like, I truly don't even know, why are we bombing Yemen? I know that Yemen has been suffering these kind of attacks for years, but I rarely hear American news sources talking about it, to the point where even in the group chat, Pete Hegseth said, no one knows who the Houthis are. And as much as I hate co-signing anything Hegseth says, I think he's largely right that most of us are underinformed on the situation. So, like, I'll ask you, do you know anything, like, what's going on in Yemen?
Yeah, so I've kept in, well, I was going to say kept in touch, which sounds insane. So we've been bombing Yemen for so long. I remember for a long time there was a civil war going on there where Saudi Arabia got involved, and because Saudi Arabia got involved, that meant America had to get involved. Yemen is, of course, one of the first places where we really broke a lot of international rules because it's where Obama airstruck a U.S. citizen without any due process. So if you're reading the news, just understand that things are not unprecedented, they're just further down a very slippery slope, and that's what we should be really afraid of. But in any case, the Houthis sort of came into prominence during the first Trump administration, when he started bombing them quite indiscriminately. And it's got to the place where it was so bad that Bernie Sanders, I don't know if you guys remember him, actually proposed a bill where he was trying to prohibit the U.S. from military action in Yemen. And it actually managed to pass in a bipartisan way in both the, I don't know why I blanked on that word, but it really did. It managed to, that's how rare it is today. It managed to pass in the Senate and the House, but it was unfortunately then vetoed by Trump.
And is this something that America should be involved in? Like, Again, I just don't know any of the details on why we're involved. I know you said that Saudi Arabia got involved and therefore America had to get involved. I assume that's just because...
I want to be very, very clear that when I say that America has to be involved, that is as tongue-in-cheek as possible.
For sure. And, I'm not ascribing that to you. You're saying ultimately it's not America has to be involved. It's therefore America became involved. I understand that. But does America actually need to be involved in this? I suspect it's not an issue where we would all hear it and agree America has to be involved in it. It seems like it's a political issue in itself of whether we're involved, and which is why it's so frustrating that we can't talk about that, because we've been talking about how clownish these buffoons are. But like, is it something we should be involved in? I guess in your opinion?
Absolutely not. It's basically a thing where first Saudi Arabia decided to get involved in their civil war, and because Saudi Arabia is such a close ally to the United States, they dragged us into some of the first strikes upon Yemen. Even before that, you could argue that the war on terror basically meant that the entire Middle East was on the watch list for a while. More recently, essentially the Houthis were destroying shipping routes that required just ships to get through that part of the world, and a lot of these things were supplies going to Israel. So the Houthis were, I'm not sure how intentionally, I'm sure somewhat intentionally, but somewhat intentionally became some of the strongest allies to the Palestinians because they were actually harming Israeli aims in a real and tangible way. So the United States felt that they had to back up their ally in that sense. All of this feels like the kind of thing I would never get involved for any of this. But for the past 20 years, I've been proven wrong, I guess.
And I guess, so since I truly just don't know, are the Houthis like the governmental power? Are they in the position of power as like running the country of Yemen? Or are they just like a body that exists within Yemen that is causing this trouble for shipping.
From what I understand, they're a paramilitary rebel group, so they are not directly attached to the Yemenis government, which makes it, I guess, much harder for them to be dealt with on the international stage. The law of armed conflict tends to sort of look the other way when there is a third-party group, both in terms of upholding their obligations in war and also their victims.
And are they doing it specifically to harm Israel, or what is their reason for?
Yeah, more or less. I mean, so essentially it's a proxy war where the Houthis are funded by a lot of groups in Iran that are, I think, like loosely connected to the Iranian government, but you can argue that the loosely thing is maybe just a, culpable liability type thing, pretext. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So what you're actually seeing is Saudi Arabia versus Iran inside Yemen. And as Iran and Israel have beef, Iran would not dare to normally directly attack Israel, but they are willing to let the Houthis do it on their behalf. All of that is to be said that there was a ceasefire for a long time that Israel had with the Houthis that was broken recently with Israel's most recent strikes over the Palestinians. And so the Houthis started responding, I believe, in March. And that's when the U.S. decided to get involved and strike back. But essentially, attacking the Houthis is one of the most American things you can do if you're in power, because both sides, the Democrats and the Republicans, have done it. But it's also pretty consistently just a graveyard for our war crimes.
Is Signal even secure enough for this? And what I've looked into, it does not seem to matter. Like, yes, Signal is more secure than WhatsApp, which is quite literally the lowest bar you could expect to clear for anything. But it doesn't matter if it's secure as an app because the phones aren't necessarily secure. So
once you can hack into the phone, you're able to access all the apps on that phone, one of which is Signal.
Exactly. It's also worth noting that because officials aren't supposed to be using Signal, and a government-issued phone shouldn't have Signal installed on it, it is quite likely that they're using personal phones for Signal. I'm not sure that that's been completely confirmed yet, but the government phones aren't supposed to have the app available on it at all, or any other commercially available communication app.
Yeah.
So if the phone's not secure, it doesn't matter what the apps individually are like.
Right.
And by all accounts, in this situation, they were not secure. Der Spiegel, a German news website, was able to find phone information, including in some cases password data for Waltz, Hegseth, and Gabbard, a feat that they described as particularly easy. It was also concluded that Steve Witkoff, the U.S. Special Envoy for Ukraine and the Middle East, was currently in Russia while participating in this group chat.
I think what's even scarier, though, just to maybe get my conspiracy theory hat on, also related to Der Spiegel, is that it was actually discovered that Hegseth does in fact have a Russian email address. And it kind of feels like sometimes maybe the real discovery here is that we should be focusing on whatever is in that email account. It drives me nuts that we kind of decided that there's no way the Trump-Russia hoax was real. Yeah. When in reality, I think if you look at all of his actions since taking office back in 2017, all of it sure feels like Russia has information on the Trump administration. And Hegseth having a Russian email just seems like it kind of feeds into that.
That does dovetail in quite nicely because the current speculation exists that this was an intentional obfuscation of the communication records after the communications were used against him in the Mueller investigation during his first term. Now, I don't know that this can be completely confirmed at this point. Can we say what Trump explicitly wants and doesn't? When he's, for all accounts, really didn't seem to know about this group chat. I mean, even when he was first pressed with it and they were talking about what about Pete Hegseth in this Signal group chat, he said, what are we talking about Pete Hegseth for? What? He's a great guy. What are we talking about him for? And it's like, Grandpa, he's literally the guy. He's the one that did the thing. And like, there's tons of times where he lies and he's just like, I don't know what you're talking about. And look, I can't know, but it did not, watching the video, seem like he was lying. It seemed like he was truly clueless about the situation. But it would not be beyond reason that his whole administration is like, I don't like that they kept, I use all the official channels and they just like held those against me. We shouldn't do that. Let's put them on other places, especially because in this group chat, in the Signal group chat, after they had already discussed all these things, Mike Waltz, I believe it was Mike Waltz that made the changed it to where the records are supposed to be deleted after 4 weeks. So like an auto delete thing on there. And it does seem like it is an intentional desire to hide the records of this conversation. That very much backfired. Another thing that was deliciously ironic was that in the group chat at the beginning, they were talking about, should we postpone this whole thing for a month? And everybody was like, actually, there'd be no problem if we did that. It would change two things, but not really adjust the overall calculus. We'd be fine with doing that. And then ultimately decided, well, what are the downsides? Well, this could leak and we'd look indecisive. And it's like, boy, oh boy, did it leak? And that's not the take we have.
I even think, if you really look into it, it kind of sort of feeds into Trump's megalomania. I think the real reason he doesn't have strong takes on this is that the part of me just thinks that he's a little bit hurt that he wasn't included. I think he really wishes one of his numbers was associated with this group chat, even if he himself would not be chiming in. You know what I mean? Like, I think in his place, like, you should be adding my phone because I don't check it anyway. And that way I would get the credit and feel strong and silent while you guys do all the real work.
I mean, that is very possible. Well, there is, because we talked about this with Doge back off pod several weeks ago, where there is this genius thing of, with Doge, Elon gets to take all the flack for making all the decisions that Trump would benefit from and kind of wants in the first place. And there is something genius about putting other people out there to do it, and you just get credit because it's your administration.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think he's quite confident that he'll get away with taking the credit for everything and letting everyone else get the flag.
Because he will. But going back to the why are they using Signal, the speculation on this obfuscation, it's worth noting that like the documents that Trump hid in Mar-a-Lago and refused to give back after Biden won, and it was like, hey, you can't have these documents anymore. And he was like, oh, yeah, sure. And they're like, so you're going to give him back? And he was like, I'm not going to do that. And then they're like, okay, well, here's a court order saying you have to do that. And his response was to hide them, which I don't know if you ever seen the photo. I heard about it for a while. I looked up the photo recently for this, and I kind of just imagined it was like a couple manila folders. It was like 20 boxes stacked, like 20 cardboard boxes full of documents stacked up in his bathroom next to like a gilded toilet. Yeah. It was very, very absurd to see. And it should be noted that even in this leak, a lot of conservative pundits and politicians are talking about, oh, what about Hillary with her email server? When it's like a group chat, how is that fundamentally different from an email server if you're trying to hide it and separating it and deleting stuff? And it's also like, we're then like, oh, what about Biden when he had documents next to his Porsche in his garage? And it's like, well, yeah, Biden had those files, and then he returned them without being asked. Whereas again, Trump defied a court order to hide them. So it's like, why are you guys even bringing this up? One of the biggest rabble-rousing points I see from people getting on both sides of the aisle very upset about this is, does this leak constitute a breach of the Espionage Act? Because he's leaking operational things that are potentially classified to just whoever, you know?
If theoretically Pete Hegseth did not have the authority to declassify these kinds of details, this would absolutely be a violation of the Espionage Act, which is essentially, stop leaking classified data. It's a pretty simple act, especially to people who might be on the other side. And this is what really bothers me, is that it's actually within that Mar-a-Lago documents case that this case sort of becomes relevant again. Because essentially, Trump was able to successfully argue that because he is president, he was allowed to declassify all of the documents in a bathroom in Mar-a-Lago.
It's so absurd.
I can't believe I got to live long enough to say a sentence like that. But essentially, we're at the same case here. Hegseth is allowed to declassify whatever the hell he wants when it comes to things like OPSEC. And that's what he did here for this strike. Or at the very least, that's what they're now going to say he did here in order to make sure he doesn't run afoul of the Espionage Act. This is why elections matter. Unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure. And I will say this because this is a point. Is there an argument that he has to have announced that it was declassified before this came out, or intentionally? Because like the fact that he said this all to people who would have authorization and accidentally said it to a journalist, is there any argument that, oh, you didn't actually declassify it officially before giving it to him because you didn't intentionally do that?
And unfortunately, that probably used to be the case, but post-Trump and the Mar-a-Lago documents case, that is no longer the case. Because it's very clear that Trump declassified those documents in his mind. according to his own arguments. So unfortunately, once we were basically able to be like, okay, fine, that will not be a thing that we pursue to any real degree, suddenly that's the case here as well, or at least that seems to be the case. The other thing that we also have to remember is that, they control the Justice Department. So this is the kind of thing that Democrats would be forced to have an independent counsel sort of look over and deal with. And this is definitely the kind of thing that Republicans won't ever bring up again the moment we stop bringing it up. Yeah. One of the reasons these guys are so awful is that they refuse to admit they made a mistake. And as a result, the military can't look away because they have no reason to believe that this was an innocent mistake. If you actually look at the history of the military, typically leaks happen constantly. Classified documents are left in unsecure areas all the time. It's kind of one of the other random addendums to all of this happening. Just generally, the person apologizes for doing so, and if it's an innocent mistake, the military looks the other way.
Yeah, it is wild how clear something can be an oopsie daisy, and then be like, "What? You crazy? Nuh-uh." And especially when their big defense is, well, actually, that journalist is really stupid and dumb, and we can't even trust him. And it's like, okay, man, that's not an indictment on him. That's an indictment on your involving him in the first place. If this person is so terrible, maybe why are they in a group chat that you created?
Yeah, shouldn't that make it even worse that you put him in there? Why are you arguing our side for us?
Exactly. I guess, darn, we can't lock him up for treason. But there are other potential crimes here, like the Federal Records Act. From my understanding, the Freedom of Information Act is something that I should be able, or maybe a journalist should be able, I don't know if I can do it, but to look up these records. Like, eventually, things are supposed to be entered into history, so we know why the government's doing, at least on paper, why they're doing what they're doing, or what led to what. And they're just trying to delete those records after 4 weeks when 57 civilians are being killed and confirmed in this message chat. So, are they allowed to do that?
Yeah, so, they are required by law and statute to preserve all of their records. It's something as simple as, we live in a democracy, our people deserve transparency, so you better preserve our ability to see what you did and why. Now, classified information takes longer to declassify and be released to the general public. But again, technically, if, as the government claims, there was no classified information here, then this is the kind of stuff that shouldn't be a big deal for us to see. Mm-hmm. Which means that when they have a timer that says that these chats should be deleted within 4 weeks, they are very clearly breaking the law.
Hey, that's one win for us.
Yeah.
What's the likelihood that anyone's going to see any consequences, even if it's just being forced to resign?
Yeah, I mean, you would assume that if someone is forced to resign, it'll probably be Mike Waltz, because in comments, that seems to be who Trump has decided to blame for this. It was reported by Politico a couple of weeks ago that essentially J.D. Vance has been pushing for Mike Waltz to take the fall for this. Who knows how true that is? That's definitely unsubstantiated sources. But essentially, if there was a fall guy, people would blame the guy who added the journalist to the group chat. As for jail time, unfortunately, the Trump administration is playing fast and loose here. If a Democrat did anything close to this, there would be an independent group within the district attorney's office who would be looking into this and investigating everything. The Justice Department would take a very strong stance on this and try to be as neutral as possible. Here, it's unlikely that it even gets checked or there is even an investigation because they have no interest in holding these people to account.
Yeah, so that is unfortunate that doesn't seem there's much legal recourse for it, but you'd really, really hope that somebody at least has to resign. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter because somebody equally bad will take their place immediately. The mechanism, the machine of the Trump administration is much more dangerous than any of these individual people. I'll be honest, I didn't know who Mike Waltz was until this story happened. But just for the optics of somebody taking the fall for one of the most, a blunder so bad that even Trump voters and people who are still ardent Trump supporters are like, hey, this seems bad. It's like, hey, those people are so willing to buy into your bull. So this is pretty bad. The least we can do is have somebody resign and then get a golden parachute.
It really feels like the Trump administration has decided that their real stance is that we have decided that we are above the law. And if we admit that we made a mistake here, then we might not be above the law. Therefore, we can't admit we made a mistake here. And unfortunately, for the rest of us, it also feels simultaneously that our real position should be like, you guys are not above the law, but I would like the case for why we argue you're not above the law to be about something else.
With all that in mind, Sid, can they just do that?
Well, unfortunately, this week the answer is yes. They can do this so long as Hegseth claims that he declassified all of this information, and so long as they follow a judge's court orders to preserve these chats. Then yes, they can just do that.
Is there anything we can do about that?
I think this is where this issue in particular I wanted to do this episode, because it's kind of in this really weird gray middle ground, right? Where I would love it if people had the time to call their senators to make sure that these chats are preserved. But if we're being honest, this isn't a priority. Like,
right.
What should you do about this? My real advice is, unfortunately, you should roll your eyes, hope other people make it a big deal, but you should be pushing on your senators to, as of this recording, the United States government is still essentially kidnapping and deporting students. And today, the day that we're recording this, it just came out that we deported someone to El Salvador despite knowing he shouldn't have been deported to El Salvador. A literal oopsie, which will definitely become a future episode for this podcast. My point being, what should we do about this? Focus on the things that are even worse.
So at the end of the day, you say we should roll your eyes. I think a better conclusion is, at the end of the day, what should you do? Make a bunch of memes about it. Be really annoying to Pete Hegseth specifically. Make it very loud in public discourse that he's a buffoon and an idiot. And I think it's really important to note, we live in a meritocracy, okay? Like, that's our whole thing is we're cutting DEI. Despite one of my Instagram followers wanted me to make the joke that, should we say something that he got his job from DEI, because let's not act like Pete Hegseth didn't get hired because he's a white man. So like all these things, they're cutting all these DEI things because we need to stay and make it clear that this is the administration of a meritocracy. And it took less than 2 months for them to have a group chat with operational details that they included a journalist that none of them had even ever met before.
Yeah. And I think it's a reminder too of just, at the end of the day, I have serious doubts that this is the first time this has happened. It's just been the first time that it's leaked.
Yeah, 100%. I think that the way that they're responding to this really shows that this is not the first time they've done a Signal group chat. It has probably been the status quo for how this administration has been communicating with each other, which is probably part of why they're saying, hey, Doge, your Signal stuff has to be preserved also, because we can just assume.
How about this? I'll say this. I think it's a reminder that elections matter. It's a reminder that not only does that power exist, but when your side wins, they're choosing not to wield this power. And if they're choosing not to wield this power in a way that ultimately hurts their fellow citizens, they should be held to task for that. It's one of those things where you're like, the Trump administration is revealing that the executive branch within the United States is going to have way more power than the founders ever intended. But as long as they have that power, when our side gets into office, they should use it rather than, sort of hold to the norms of civility. If this power is going to exist, if Republicans are going to insist that it exists, then it needs to be used.
And here's the tragic thing that I feel is true. As true as what you just said is, that's not going to happen. That's not what Democrats do. Democrats are very much about like, we'll take the high road and we'll show them this is what you do when you get this power. You say, no, thank you. And it's like, well, no, they're not gonna respect your goodwill. Again, it's why I can't watch The West Wing, because it's just like, oh, you won the argument. Dang. Okay. Well, that got me. It's truly Dora the Explorer. Swiper, no swiping. And he's like, ah, man.
But again, to get actually even darker than that statement, the Democrats are willing to do it. They're just not willing to do it to help us, right? Obama was willing to expand executive power in order to order a drone strike on a U.S. citizen in Yemen, where this story began, technically. He was willing to do that without any due process for that U.S. citizen, right? So once, this was not a combatant. This was someone who was sort of helping people enlist with the Houthis and ISIS and so on and so forth. And so once we started that slippery slope, it kind of proves that Democrats are willing to expand executive power. They should be pushed to do so in order to help us. I think it's time to keep hope alive, that we will find hope in the next episode.
Better luck next time.